All right, this is the Podcast Cleaner demo. I'm going to take you through some of the things I can do for your podcasting platform and tell you a little bit about the software that I'm using here. First things first, I have some files downloaded to demo. These are from my friends over at the Moon Eye Music Hour podcast and a local New Orleans podcast called The Scoop. I'm going to go ahead and kick off the processing manually on my server. This would all happen automatically, but just for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to kick it off manually. How this works is I will get an RSS feed from you. Hopefully this will be a feed with uncompressed audio, like a WAV file. However, if you don't have a WAV file, I can take any file format you use. Hopefully it's high quality, because obviously you will get higher quality if you provide me with a higher quality file. Once I do my processing, I will give you an RSS feed back. This will be automatically updated. You drop a file into the feed, it'll process automatically 24/7, 7 days a week. After that happens, it will be updated in your output feed, and you'll get the processed file. You can download it and publish it however you see fit. Now, the difference between my software and the stuff that's built into a lot of podcast players, like, say, for instance, Overcast on iOS, is they use, a standard compressor, it sounds like, and normalization, which makes the audio nice and loud. But if you've got any kind of music or high fidelity audio content in your podcast, it will pretty much murder that audio. So the difference is I use a technique called multiband compression, as well as equalization, normalization, and quite a few other audio tricks. And it's all automated using a Linux command line utility called SOX. I have a background as an audio engineer. I've been doing it for over a decade, and I've also been a systems administrator for a while now. So that combined experience, hopefully, will let me help you make your podcast the best it can be, and for a better price, because I know a lot of podcast producers, their budget simply does not allow for a full-time audio engineer on retainer, such as would be had by a place called like NPR or the Twit Studios, for instance. And a lot of them, even if they do have an audio engineer, they're mainly cleaning up the files. They're not doing advanced audio processing. And I can't really blame them, because, who's going to be able to handle all that on a budget of, two guys recording podcasts for fun, basically. Maybe you've got a little bit of advertising revenue, but you don't want to throw that away with a full-time audio engineer if you can't afford it. My service is going to be cheap. It's going to be on the order of like $1 a month to $10 a month for the premium tier. And it will basically take any file you give me and then spit out a processed version. And it's going to basically analyze the entire length of the episode or the individual file you give me. And it's going to find the average volume of that file and use that as an input to give it a sort of custom tailored audio processing. So that's kind of where it's different from the other podcast apps that are on the market today. It's tailored to your each individual episode. It's not doing, just squashing everything and hoping for the best. It's giving it a little more intelligence. Let's see if this processing is finished. It is. So you should see these waveforms start to fill out. Okay, so my files have finished processing. You can see I've got the output down here on the bottom track. You can see the waveform is significantly different than the input file. The peaks have been limited, so there's headroom on the output. There's only 2 decibels of headroom, just enough to give the playback some breathing room so that any artifacts created during playback by the different systems used by Android and iOS and your desktop, etc., don't cause clipping, and it improves the listening experience for your listener while still maintaining a very high average output level. You can see the original files had very high peaks, but the average level was all over the place. So I've normalized the file and compressed the audio dynamics so that they're all a little closer together. It may look like it's pretty squashed, but in actuality, when I'm not zoomed into an hour, you can see it's not quite so bad. So let's start off with this first file. They've got a little bit of intro music, and then they have some dialogue here. Let's take a listen to before and after.
And now from the beautiful hills of Northwest Georgia is Chatsworth.
Okay, so you see that's kind of low music volume, then a high voiceover. Let's listen to the after file. You'll see that the music has much more full frequency range response, and that the voice sort of blends into that a little better.
And now from the beautiful hills of Northwest Georgia is Chatsworth's finest podcast, Moon Eye Music Hour, with your host, Jake Sane.
Okay, so you get the idea. There's a lot more bass response going on there. Since the bass was kind of low, it's brought it back up to match the rest of the frequency. Likewise, if you are having a band in your studio or something and their bass player or their guitar player is kind of going crazy and their volume is through the roof, it's going to work to rectify that a little bit and bring it down to match the rest of the band. That's the benefit you get with multi-band compression and some of the other processing I'm doing. So let's listen to a little dialogue difference between before and after.
Local songwriters and bands and things that are out there trying to do their own stuff.
And you'll hear the host, Jake, starts talking, and then there's a bunch of loud applause coming right afterwards. The difference is going to be a little staggering and probably would be jarring for the listener.
Cold Creek for letting us do this tonight.
You can see there it actually peaks the output a little bit. Let's listen to the after track.
Cold Creek for letting us do this tonight. Yeah.
You can hear the compressor working here during the applause, kind of keeping the volume lower, but allowing the spoken vocal to raise up to that volume a little better. So it's a little bit less of a jarring difference. So that's a better listening experience for the end user, the person who's going to download your podcast. They're not having to fiddle with their volume knob as much. If they're driving in the car, they don't have to turn it up to hear the quiet parts and then get blown out of the water by the loud parts. Vice versa, when they're listening to the loud parts and the vocal comes back in, the voiceover, they don't, not hear it because their car is rumbling or they're, driving through a noisy area or something. Let's go on to the next part that's relevant to podcast producers. Let's say you have a sponsorship, you have an advertiser. I know pretty much every podcast has some sort of advertiser, and they give you some media to play back if you're not going to do the sponsor yourself. You can see the difference between the spoken voice here and the media file that he plays back is quite different. The voice here is louder than the whole track that they give him to play back. Now, this media file that they've provided, you can't really do anything with that. They'll just give you an MP3 or something, and you can't go in there and remix it and do much with it. Well, my software is going to do the same thing to this part of the audio that it's doing to the rest. It's going to bring the frequency response in line across the mid, the bass, and the treble, and it's also going to compress the dynamic range so that everything kind of smooths together a little bit. Let's hear the before and after here.
For a word from our official sponsor, which is, of course, Cold Creek Growlers.
Cold Creek is your craft beer destination.
So you sort of get the idea there. This is kind of louder than that, and they both sound like it's obvious that there's a different file being played back here. If we look at the after processed file, you'll see this volume is already juiced up a good bit, and then this is kind of brought up to match it. You can see they're kind of the same volume there. That's going to help it blend together a little bit, or it's going to make it feel like you put a lot more thought into making your sponsorship recorded media a little closer to your own. It's going to sound better to sponsors, and it's going to be a better listening experience for your audience. Let's take a listen to the after.
For a word from our official sponsor, which is, of course, Cold Creek Growlers.
Cold Creek is your craft beer destination. They feature the best selection of craft beer on drought.
So you can kind of see how you're getting more of a radio / NPR kind of feel from that advertisement spot. So that's kind of nice. Now, before we move on to the next one, let's listen to a little bit of music here. Let's go with the before.
Well, I ain't gonna fly off in a crazy rage.
And the after.
Ain't gonna sit back and just die of old age. Gonna take the middle road to see my day.
A benefit you may be hearing there is that the voice and the music that is singing there is kind of glued together a little better. It's giving it a more all-around, rounded out kind of feeling.
So I'm just continuing. This song here.
You can hear that's kind of low, and it's brought back up.
This song here, this is...
So you can see that it's really good for a wide variety of cases. Let's move on to the other podcast I have here. This is The Scoop. These are just some guys having a good time with the guests they have on, local musicians and such. You can see here at the intro, the same deal. They've got some intro music that they're talking over. Let's listen to the before.
Speak for yourselves.
I was.
You hear their vocals are kind of overpowering the background music there. That's not a huge problem for this use case, but it might be if you were trying to like listen to a YouTube video or play an MP3 for your audience. So let's hear the after on that.
Speak for yourselves.
I was.
So you can hear the vocals and the music are blending together a lot smoother. And hopefully the difference there is clear to hear, that you're getting a more well-produced sound there. It sounds like something that would be put out by one of these larger networks with a bigger budget. Let's do the before and after again there.
Speak for yourselves.
I was.
Speak for yourselves.
I was.
Okay, so let's go with some more dialogue here. You see that the levels are kind of all over the place. They've got a really quiet person, then a really loud person. Let's listen before and after.
We were going to put you guys as 50, but we're going to put short stories as 50 now. You guys
Wait, how can you? Y'all already skipped over
what
47.
authority you got?
Okay, and the after.
We were going to put you guys as 50, but we're going to put short stories as 50 now. You guys.
Wait, how can you? Y'all already skipped over
what
47.
All right, hopefully those changes are easy to hear. Let's go over a couple of bullet points before I end the video here. The end user is really the one who's going to benefit here, but if you are a podcast producer, you can get this set up so it's automated and you can subscribe to my service and I'll process your files 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you're an end user who's just tired of, having to listen to podcasts with audio level all over the place, I can certainly subscribe you as well. You'll just give me a list of your podcasts. I'll just put them on my list of podcasts to be processed and give you a custom feed, which will be yours and yours alone, where you can listen to a processed version of that podcast. Hopefully this can end up being a one-stop audio shop, and it's not only for podcasters. If you've got a small band and you want to release demos regularly of your shows or your practices, you can subscribe to this service, and we can work out a method to deliver your files however you want. But you'll be able to have them processed quickly and better quality, hopefully, than having to struggle through it yourself if you're not experienced at it. I can also convert formats. You give me a WAV and I'll send you an MP3, FLAC, another WAV, basically any file format you want I can convert. All right, thank you for listening, and I hope you find this useful. Please contact me if you're interested in subscribing to this service. We should be coming out of beta shortly. I could give you a discounted rate during beta, so that might be something you want to get on top of. Thank you for listening.